When we imagine the Middle Ages, our minds often drift to castles, knights, and sprawling feasts inside drafty stone halls. But the truth is, ordinary life was filled with far humbler meals, and, just like us, people had their guilty pleasures, snacks that weren't always refined, but certainly popular. In a world without supermarkets, vending machines, or fast food chains glowing on every street corner, medieval people found their own ways of indulging between meals. Their junk food wasn't wrapped in shiny foil or served in paper bags, but it was very much real, filling the same role it does today, a small, tasty escape from the daily grind. Picture the bustling streets of a medieval town. The cobblestones are slick with mud, animals wander freely, and the air is a tangle of smells: baked bread, roasted meat, smoke from hearths, and the less pleasant scents of a city with little drainage. Among the noise of merchants hawking cloth or pots and pans, food sellers would set up simple stalls, offering quick bites for those who couldn't afford a sit-down meal. One of the most common and beloved snacks was the humble meat pie. They were small enough to hold in the hand, wrapped in thick pastry that acted as both container and insulation. The pastry wasn't always meant to be eaten. It was sometimes just a way to keep the filling together, but the seasoned meat inside was the real prize. Imagine biting into something warm, greasy, and seasoned with whatever spices were available: pepper, cloves, even saffron if you were wealthy. For the poor, it might be nothing more than scraps of pork, onion, and a pinch of salt. But to them, it was a comfort food, eaten quickly on the go. Sweetness was also highly sought after, though sugar was considered a luxury. Honey filled that gap, and honey cakes became a treat beloved across Europe. They were simple, often coarse, but dripping with the golden richness of beeswax. Imagine a medieval child clutching a sticky little cake, the sweet warmth on their tongue, a rare escape from the otherwise plain diet of bread and porridge. And when fairs and festivals came to town, sellers sometimes fried dough in oil, primitive donuts if you will, dusted with spices or dipped in honey. These weren't everyday foods, but the medieval equivalent of carnival treats, linked to laughter, music, and the gathering of neighbors. Roasted nuts, too, made their way into hands and pockets. Almonds were especially favored, though chestnuts, hazelnuts, and walnuts were more common for ordinary folk. Some nuts were candied with honey, making them a crunchy, sweet indulgence you could carry around in a small pouch. Imagine the crackle of roasted shells beneath your teeth as you walk through a market, the chatter of townspeople blending with the sound of a distant lute, your fingers sticky from the sweet coating. Cheese played its role as well, sometimes soft and crumbly, sometimes hard enough to be shaved or eaten in thick slices. It was both a staple and a treat, depending on how it was prepared. Poorer people would nibble on cheese with coarse rye bread, while wealthier households could enjoy it infused with herbs or paired with dried fruits like figs and dates, imported delicacies that turned a humble snack into a moment of luxury. Even the idea of street food existed. Peddlers walked with trays, offering small skewers of roasted meats, fish fried in batter, or even boiled peas flavored with salt and vinegar, eaten by hand as a cheap filler for hungry stomachs. The experience wasn't refined, but it was accessible and comforting, especially for those who lived from one wage to the next. And of course, the medieval love for ale meant that many snacks were washed down with mugs of beer, cheaper than clean water in many towns, giving these little indulgences an added sense of merriment. This world of medieval junk food is almost invisible in history books, overshadowed by the grand feasts of kings or the elaborate banquets of nobles. Yet it tells us something deeply human, that across centuries, no matter how tough or uncertain life may have been, people always sought a taste of comfort, a bite of sweetness, or a salty, greasy snack to break the monotony. It connects us, in a strange way, to the medieval townsman pausing at a stall, coins in hand, drawn by the scent of roasting meat or frying dough. Their junk food may not have looked like ours, but the feeling it brought, satisfaction, indulgence, and maybe a little guilt, was timeless. If you think of medieval junk food only as a street-side indulgence, it's worth remembering that much of it was tied to rhythm and season. Unlike our modern convenience snacks, available all year long in neat packaging, medieval treats were shaped by what was growing, what was harvested, and what could be preserved. The passing of time dictated cravings. In autumn, when apples tumbled down from orchards, you might find vendors roasting them over open fires, sprinkling them with a bit of spice if it was affordable. For a few pennies, you could buy one, soft, warm, and fragrant, something like a distant ancestor of today's candied apple. During Lent, when meat and dairy were forbidden by the church, creative cooks turned to fried vegetables, chickpea fritters, or little cakes made from almond paste, giving the impression of richness without breaking religious rules. What we might see as a clever substitute was, to them, a chance to enjoy something that tasted just a little sinful in a season of restraint. Festivals and holy days were the real stages for indulgence. When the town square came alive with banners, jugglers, and music, food sellers multiplied, filling the air with scents that made the day memorable. Think of fairs like enormous outdoor kitchens, spits turning with sausages, stalls dripping with sweetmeats, and jugs of mulled wine steaming in the cold. For many, these were rare opportunities to taste something new, something exotic. Spiced wine was especially treasured, a simple drink transformed by cinnamon, ginger, or cloves, brought from far-off lands by merchants who risked long and perilous journeys. To sip such a drink wasn't just to warm the body, but to taste the wealth of empires and trade routes, a luxury distilled into a humble wooden cup. Not every snack was glamorous, though. Sometimes the most beloved junk foods were the simplest. Fried fish wrapped in a scrap of parchment, warm barley cakes eaten straight from the griddle, or hard cookies flavored with anise and fennel that could be dipped into ale. These were not meals of prestige. They were meant for workers, travelers, and hungry children tugging at their mother's sleeve. Yet in those simple bites lay the comfort of the familiar, the kind of food you didn't have to wait hours for, the kind you could hold in your hands as you hurried through a busy street. The way these foods were sold is just as fascinating as the foods themselves. Imagine the noise of the vendors, voices carrying through the market, calling out deals, singing rhymes to catch attention. Some sold from carts with wheels creaking under their load. Others carried trays hanging from straps around their necks, weaving between crowds with practiced ease. Coins changed hands quickly, and the smell of cooking oil clung to their clothes as they moved from one hungry customer to the next. There was no sense of cleanliness in the modern way, no hand-washing stations, no tidy napkins. But there was a sense of community, of shared experience, as townsfolk clustered around the same stalls. In villages, junk food had an even more rustic flavor. Children might nibble on roasted chestnuts cracked open beside the hearth, or chew on strips of dried fruit when it was available. Sometimes, these little indulgences were prepared at home, not bought in markets. Housewives fried scraps of dough left over from bread making, turning what might have been waste into hot, crisp morsels sprinkled with salt. Farmers' wives, with access to fresh milk, might churn a small portion into soft cheese and flavor it with herbs, a snack shared among family after long days in the fields. For poorer families, these little moments of flavor were not taken for granted. They were treasured, remembered, and perhaps even told in stories to children later in life. One might think that medieval junk food was unchanging, but it was in fact always shifting, shaped by trade, harvest, and war. When new ingredients arrived, almonds, sugar, exotic spices. They filtered slowly into kitchens, first in noble feasts, then gradually trickling down to townsfolk through festivals and markets. Imagine tasting sugar for the first time. A substance so precious it was once sold by the ounce, cut into tiny lumps and savoured slowly on the tongue. For those who could afford it, sugar turned ordinary nuts, fruits or breads into something almost magical. And so, the idea of sweet snacks grew, a concept that still lingers with us in our candy bars and pastries today. It's easy to forget, when we think of the Middle Ages, that life was not only about survival, but also about pleasure, even in small doses. People longed for flavor, for variety, for a little taste that lifted them from the sameness of bread, broth, and porridge. Junk food provided that escape. It was not only nourishment, but entertainment, something to look forward to when the work was heavy, when the weather was cold, or when the church bells announced another holy day. And so, in a world that often seems so far removed from our own, medieval junk food reminds us of a truth as old as humanity itself. No matter the century, no matter the hardship, we will always find ways to treat ourselves. If you were to step into a medieval kitchen, the very heart of snack making, you would find a space quite unlike our modern idea of a tidy stove and cupboards. Instead, the hearth dominated, a wide open fire, sometimes big enough to walk into, with iron pots hanging from hooks and embers glowing beneath clay tiles. The smells here were strong and layered: smoke, boiled meats, singed bread crust, and occasionally the sweet tang of fruit preserves simmering slowly in earthen pots. From this fire, both meals and indulgences were born. Housewives and cooks often used what they had at hand to create small nibbles for children, travelers, or unexpected guests. If a little dough remained after baking the family's bread, it might be rolled thin and fried in fat dusted with herbs or honey and served hot. These scraps, not meant to be luxurious, were nonetheless moments of delight, passed around the household before vanishing almost instantly. Preservation was another route to junk food. Fruits, when harvested, were precious. Fresh for only a short while, then gone for the year. To make them last, people dried them in the sun or over slow fires. These chewy, sweetened morsels, apples, plums, figs, were eaten like we might eat a handful of raisins or trail mix today. Sometimes, fruits were boiled in honey or wine, transformed into thick pastes pressed into wooden molds. These little slabs could be cut into slices and carried on journeys, giving bursts of energy to travelers trudging along muddy roads or pilgrims walking for weeks toward holy shrines. For someone weary on the road, a preserved fruit sweetmeat was more than food. It was relief, morale, and a taste of home. Among the upper classes, indulgence took on a theatrical quality. Imagine a noble's banquet, the tables groaning with roasted swans and gilded pies. But between courses, trays of candied nuts, spiced wafers, and sugared almonds were passed around. These were not eaten for hunger but for pleasure, for status, for display. A guest who popped a sugared nut into their mouth was not only enjoying the sweetness, but tasting the very wealth and reach of their host's household, a reminder of trade stretching all the way to the Middle East and beyond. To chew on candied almonds in a candlelit hall, surrounded by musicians and courtiers, was to savor both sugar and power at once. And yet, just a few miles away, in the smoky taverns of a nearby village, peasants might be enjoying their own rustic junk foods, bowls of peas salted and cooked until soft, barley fritters, or a shared jug of ale with hunks of cheese. In this way, junk food crossed class lines, taking on different forms, but always tied to the same human craving for flavor and enjoyment. Taverns themselves deserve a special place in the story of medieval snacking. Dimly lit, loud, and filled with the scent of alcohol and wood smoke, they were as much social hubs as they were places to eat and drink. For travelers, they were safe havens. places to warm themselves, to rest, and to enjoy small but satisfying foods. A common tavern dish might be a bowl of stewed beans sprinkled with herbs, or fried fish pulled from a nearby river. There were also quick bites to pair with drink, salted bread, roasted meats carved into strips, or pies sold by the slice. The ale flowed constantly, and with it, the snacks became more appealing, a rhythm of sip and bite, chatter and laughter. If medieval junk food lived in the streets during the day, at night it lived in the tavern, glowing in the firelight, and passed from hand to hand in the company of friends and strangers alike. We might even think of the medieval fair as a grand showcase of junk food innovation. Here, cooks tried new methods, tested combinations, and delighted crowds with smells alone. A fried treat might be rolled in sugar if available, or dipped in honey. A roasted bird might be spiced more heavily than usual, just to tempt fairgoers with its aroma. Imagine children tugging at their parents for a taste, coins clinking as vendors shouted for attention, the stalls steaming with food that would vanish as the day wore on. These fairs were not just about commerce, but about memory. People remembered the taste of a sweet cake or a spiced drink long after the musicians had left town, long after the banners were taken down. And so, medieval junk food was not a hidden secret, but a part of the very rhythm of life. It was in the streets, in the fairs, in the taverns, in the kitchens of both poor and wealthy. It shaped festivals, it colored celebrations, and it even softened the harder edges of daily life. To taste these foods was to take part in something deeply human, the desire for a bite of comfort, a moment of indulgence, something that fed the heart as much as the body. There is something almost poetic about the way medieval junk food reflected the limitations of the time. Unlike our modern world, where snacks are mass-produced, identical, and always available, the medieval versions were fleeting, bound to the hand that made them. No two honey cakes were ever the same. No two fried doughs tasted exactly alike. Each bore the signature of the cook, the mood of the day, and the availability of ingredients. In this way, junk food was as personal as it was communal, and perhaps this intimacy made it even more satisfying. Imagine walking down a narrow street, the stones uneven beneath your shoes, and pausing at a baker's stall. You hand over a coin, receive a small pie in return, and take that first bite. Steam rising, the pastry flaking, the taste of seasoned meat or onions filling your mouth. For a moment, life feels easier, the hardships lighter. That was the true magic of medieval snacks. They did not change the world, but they changed a moment. Children, especially, found joy in these small indulgences. Their days were not filled with toys or endless entertainment. Work began young, and play was often improvised. But a sweet treat could transform everything. A simple piece of candied fruit, a sticky honey cake, or even a hot roasted chestnut pressed into little hands was enough to spark laughter. The memory of sweetness lingered, cherished long after the treat itself was gone. Parents, too, sometimes offered these foods as rewards, a small acknowledgement of good behavior or help with chores. The bond between food and affection was as present then as it is today. Junk food was never merely about the tongue. It was about comfort, reward, and celebration. It is worth considering how much imagination went into creating these foods in a world without refined sugar, chocolate, or modern baking techniques. Spices, when they could be obtained, were used sparingly but cleverly. Cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, and ginger transformed simple recipes into delights. A plain cake became something worth savoring when sprinkled with spice. A cup of ale became aromatic and warming when mulled with herbs and fruit. Even in the humblest kitchens, cooks learned to stretch flavors, to turn scraps into treats, to invent comfort out of necessity. The result was a cuisine of creativity, where indulgence was less about excess and more about cleverness. travelers carried their own forms of medieval junk food. Pilgrims, merchants, and wandering laborers needed something to eat on the road that would not spoil quickly. Hard biscuits, often flavored with anise or honey, were tucked into pouches. Dried peas, nuts, and strips of cured meat became the medieval equivalent of a trail mix. These foods were functional, but they were also reassuring. To reach into your bag and find a small morsel of something flavorful was a comfort against the fatigue of endless miles. In this sense, junk food was both indulgence and survival, a blend of necessity and pleasure. Then, there were the foods tied to rituals and special occasions. During Easter, for example, households often baked sweet buns or spiced cakes, sometimes shared with neighbors as a sign of goodwill. At Christmas, spiced wine and special pastries appeared, their rarity making them treasures of the season. These seasonal treats had an almost sacred quality, anticipated with joy and remembered with longing. They were not eaten every day, which made them all the more powerful when they finally arrived. Imagine the anticipation of a medieval child waiting all year for a taste of the honeyed bread baked only at Christmas time, or the thrill of an adult sipping mulled wine as bells rang through the cold night. In those fleeting bites and sips, the entire season lived. Even the act of sharing these foods bound communities together. In taverns, strangers might split a pie or pass around a dish of nuts, their conversations flowing more easily with each bite. At festivals, friends and families gathered around stalls, laughing and eating, weaving food into the fabric of their relationships. To share food was to share joy, and junk food, by its very nature, was designed for sharing. Portable, quick, and plentiful when the occasion allowed. It was as much about togetherness as it was about indulgence, reminding us that even centuries ago, food was one of the simplest ways to connect. And so, medieval junk food was more than greasy pies or honey cakes. It was a reflection of creativity, of community, of seasonal joy, and of fleeting moments of comfort in a hard world. It filled bellies, yes, but more importantly, it fed spirits. Each bite was a reminder that even in the shadows of castles and the toil of fields, people sought and found sweetness in life. The deeper we look at medieval junk food, the more we see how it told stories not just of appetite, but of society itself. The very foods that filled the hands of peasants and nobles alike were shaped by trade, by the seasons, and by the reach of distant lands. Take spices, for example. To us, cinnamon and ginger are commonplace, sprinkled into desserts without a thought. But to the medieval world, they were treasures, carried across deserts and seas at great cost. To taste them in a honey cake or a mulled drink was to taste the wider world, to experience a thread of connection to merchants traveling through Constantinople, Alexandria, or Venice. Even the simplest medieval treat, spiced with just a pinch of something exotic, became a reminder that the world was bigger than one's village. Junk food, in this sense, was not just indulgence. It was a glimpse of adventure, of travel, of far-off lands many would never see with their own eyes. Markets themselves were theatres of flavour. Picture a Saturday morning in a medieval town, the market square alive with chatter, chickens squawking, dogs weaving through legs, and merchants shouting in sing-song voices. Alongside baskets of onions, sacks of barley, and bolts of cloth, the smell of food hovered. Here, the baker sold flat cakes dusted with sugar or sesame seeds, still warm from the oven. There, a woman with a small iron pan fried thin slices of fish, the oil popping and hissing as curious buyers leaned closer. Children darted between stalls, clutching sticky sweets bought with the few coins their parents could spare. Each bite taken in that bustling space was part of a ritual as old as humanity, eating not only to satisfy hunger, but to celebrate life's ordinary joys. But medieval junk food was not always cheerful. It could be opportunistic, born of necessity, even desperation. During lean harvests, scraps were turned into snacks. Stale bread, rather than wasted, was soaked in broth or wine, fried until crisp, and eaten as a poor man's indulgence. Vegetable peelings, fish bones, or bits of fat might be worked into little fritters, providing something to chew on when nothing else was available. These were not glamorous, but they mattered, because even the poor longed for comfort food. In this way, junk food acted as both a mirror of hardship and a balm against it, a way to soften hunger with a bite of something flavorful, even if that flavor came from the humblest of scraps. Yet, there were moments when even the poor could taste something extraordinary. Festivals, religious holidays, and weddings often spilled food into the streets, where the boundaries between rich and poor blurred for a time. A wealthy household might distribute sweet wafers or cakes as part of their celebrations, and suddenly the town's children, normally excluded from such luxuries, were licking honey from their fingers, giggling as the rare sweetness filled their mouths. These fleeting chances to taste something beyond the ordinary were remembered for years, retold like stories, proof that life occasionally gave gifts to even the humblest. It is also fascinating to think about the sensory world these foods created. Imagine the sound of a nut cracking under your teeth in a crowded tavern, the faint sweetness of honey clinging to your tongue after a festival, or the smell of fried dough drifting through an open-air market. These small, ordinary sensations stitch themselves into memory, weaving together the fabric of medieval daily life. People did not write about them often. Scribes and chroniclers focused on wars, kings, and church decrees. But for the common man, these flavors mattered more than politics. They were the bright spots in a life otherwise shaped by labor, duty, and uncertainty. And perhaps this is why the idea of junk food is so timeless. It is not about necessity. It is about want. It is about that quiet human impulse to seek pleasure, even in small, humble bites. A medieval laborer biting into a steaming meat pie after hours of toil was not so different from us opening a bag of chips after a long day. The setting has changed, the recipes have evolved, but the craving is the same. Junk food, in its medieval form, tells us that humans have always been creatures who search for sweetness, for salt, for warmth, for a taste of comfort that lingers long after the bite is gone. If there is one truth that echoes through the ages, it is that food is never just food. Even in the medieval world, where daily survival was often harsh, uncertain, and bound by strict rhythms of labor and faith, people still found ways to indulge, to snack, to take joy in eating something small and comforting. Junk food, in its many forms, became more than a guilty pleasure. It was woven into the pulse of life itself. A roasted chestnut eaten by the roadside, a honey cake nibbled at a festival, a fried fritter passed around a noisy tavern. These were not luxuries, but pieces of humanity, moments when taste carried people beyond the grind of daily toil. To the medieval poor, these small foods softened hunger and brightened spirits. To the wealthy, they were status symbols, ways of displaying power and connections through exotic flavors and rare ingredients. To children, they were sparks of joy, memories that lived long after the treat was gone. And to travelers and pilgrims, they were lifelines, simple, sturdy foods that provided both nourishment and comfort along endless miles of muddy roads. Junk food crossed all boundaries of class, faith, and geography. It whispered the same truth in every bite. People, no matter their station, always long for a taste of comfort. What is striking is how modern this desire feels. When we walk through our own markets today, when the smell of fried dough or roasted nuts drifts through the air at a fair, when we reach for sweets during holidays or gather around snacks with friends, we are repeating something ancient. The shapes and flavors have changed. Our donuts, our chips, our candies bear little resemblance to medieval fritters or candied nuts, but the emotion behind them is exactly the same. We crave, we indulge, we savor, we share. A medieval peasant in the year 1300 and a person standing in line at a food stall today might look nothing alike, but the look in their eyes as they hold a warm, delicious bite is a mirror across centuries. And perhaps that is why learning about medieval junk food is strangely comforting. It strips away the distance between past and present, reminding us that history is not only about kings, knights, and wars. It is about ordinary people, people who laughed, who struggled, who celebrated, and who sought out small comforts wherever they could find them. When we imagine the past not as something stiff and distant, but as something human and relatable, we feel a kind of kinship across time. Suddenly, the medieval world is not a place of cold stone and stern faces, but a place where children licked honey from their fingers, where workers crowded around pies sold in the market, where families fried dough scraps by the fire. A place not so different from our own. So as you drift towards sleep, imagine yourself wandering through a medieval fair. The banners ripple in the breeze, the music of pipes and drums floats through the air, and the market stalls are alive with colour. A vendor offers you a small honey cake, still warm, sticky and sweet. And as you take a bite, you realise that people have always known this simple joy. Junk food, whether in the Middle Ages or today, is a reminder that no matter how the centuries shift, some things never change. And if you've enjoyed this gentle journey through the quiet corners of history, there are many more stories waiting to be told. From the forgotten traditions of taverns, to the lost flavours of medieval feasts, to the strange inventions of cooks who lived long before us, there is always another tale to soothe, to intrigue, and to remind us of our shared humanity. So if you'd like to keep wandering these sleepy paths of the past, consider staying with me for the next chapter, the next quiet journey into history. Subscribe, and let's keep discovering together, one slow story at a time.